The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Now, to the F group of our 2019 Orchestration Challenge entries. So, nobody get traumatized by the letter F, right? It's just an alphabetical order, and everybody's score is being evaluated in the exact order that it was received. So I'm just, this has nothing to do, there's A isn't better than F. There are some scores in this particular collection that are more developed than those in A, and there are some in A that are more developed than this, and so on and so forth. But I mean, more developed, that's kind of a judgment call, isn't it? So let's not even worry about that. Let's just appreciate these scores for what they are. Each one I found very interesting, and I cannot wait to comment on them. Now, I'm noticing that a lot of these scores start off with the flute. You know what I'm saying? Just when there are so many other instruments that that are able to play in this range, like oboe and clarinet, both have much more dynamic control in that register. The flute, of course, it's a great instrument to start off with because it is soft and it just has that wonderful kind of very fluty, breathy register. One thing about that register, though, is that it does get used up pretty quickly. The breath gets used up pretty quickly. It just is more to blow. I find that my flute players that I've collaborated with have told me. So this is a situation where you might want to go first flute and then second flute here, trading off, and then back to first flute here. Give the first flute the part that is more complex, right? Just like always assume that you might be scoring something that will be played in a semi-pro situation where the first player is auditioning around to join a bigger orchestra, and the second player is working on their real estate license, right? Possibly. Or they might be just as good as the first, but they just don't have, they've got child rearing to worry about, or they've got, they're working on a novel or something like that. Do you know what I mean? They're not as eager beaver sometimes. Or sometimes they're just both competing. You never know, who's going to play your piece. But, just always give the second some leeway, right? So, in this case, I would give the second the supporting part and the first the more active part. Now, I understand what you're doing here and giving, sort of trading off which players get the breath and so on and so forth, and that's cool. But you can just take care of that by just swapping the parts here to second, right? Anyway, okay, so moving on, I noticed that your sound set is a bit, sounded a bit reedy. Do you know what I mean? Just a little accordion-like, right? So just maybe explore that. I'm making more comments about sound sets in this one. Not that affects your ability to orchestrate whatsoever, but just that that sound sets are getting used more and more to demo things, and the demos help people get jobs. And I mean, I don't even need to listen to your sound set at all. I can just see what you are scoring here and hear it in my head. That's my sound set. But I am curious to know what people feel they're getting in their score. I like the fact that you scored transposing, though. that says a lot. That's now this is interesting. You've got this piano B flat, right? A lot of oboe teachers would tell you to not do that. Some oboists would say, "Oh, that's no problem. I can play a staccato piano on a low B flat." But this is, generally speaking, a note to kind of avoid unless there's absolutely zero way for you to substitute it with another instrument, right? Like, for instance, this would be a perfectly great note to give to your clarinet player, right? Just like right in their range. But B flat is the very lowest note for the oboe, and it is difficult to control dynamics there traditionally, right? Now, some oboe players get past that and so on and so forth, but I know that like some of these lines would be difficult on a lot of oboe players. And having said that, I'll get some people saying in the comments, "Oh, well, I have no problem with that." If you really want that really biting, short sound of a double reed player, then I would recommend giving it to the bassoon player, right? And then here you have piano A2. I mean, I don't know why you need two horns playing that in unison, right? I mean, one is going to be fine, right? If you like that sort of blended sound, I guess. Now, the dynamics are a little strange here. You do not need to go hairpins to mezzo piano and hairpin out to piano. That, there is an increase here that is taken for granted, right? So you don't really need to mark what the dynamic is in the middle of the hairpins. It just is totally not needed at all, all right? Now here I could grant you that, right? Because there is no build, or like if you just are having, if you want to supply a slightly louder dynamic, that's fine. But then once again, if you've heard some of the other lectures where I talk about mezzo piano, sometimes it's just kind of things to avoid. Do you know what I mean? Just like putting too much mezzo in your scores, right? It's just, it just kind of doesn't mean anything in the final analysis. Yeah. So I mean, other than that, having said that, the melody is pretty well doubled. Now, here, I do not feel that this harp will actually be heard by anybody. And the other thing, too, is that you've got this 2 against a 3, which is very cool, but it's going to be buried in the texture. So if you had supported this 2 against a 3, the 2, then it would have more meaning. But at this point, the effort that the player is going to put into this part will pretty much be wasted. And not much effort. This is not that hard of a part to play for the harpist. But it's still, it's still not the ideal situation to score for harp in a way that can't be heard, right? Sometimes a harpist will, will tease you about it a little bit at rehearsal, or they'll get annoyed with you, just like, "Why did I practice this? I brought it to the rehearsal and I couldn't even hear myself play," right? So it just depends on which harpist you work with. Most harpists I've worked with are pretty patient, but I mean, sometimes if they've been through like a lot of scores of the same thing, and then you just do the same thing one more time, then you're the person who gets the brunt of all of the resentment, that's been building up in the, from the other situations. Here on the next page, we kind of wrap up that whole idea, and then here we're going with a very, very low scored, like we have this triple octave here in our low strings, and then contrabassoon, bassoon, plus bass clarinet, and then the regular clarinet, standard clarinet playing all in a triple octave. So this is going to be some really dark stuff. Okay, very, very dark. Now, once again, you don't need to mark every single time back and forth like this, right? All you need to do is just have once you've said your mezzo forte here, all you need to do is just have a hairpin to this forzando and back, and you don't need to mark mezzo forte again, right? Now, I really encourage you to read some orchestration manuals talking about the bass drum. Samuel Adler recounts an anecdote from studying with Walter Piston, and when Walter Piston said, "It doesn't matter what the orchestra is doing, if you mark a fortissimo over a bass drum stroke, nobody will be able to hear anything else." All right? So I just am kind of curious why you wrote a fortissimo on that bass drum, right? Or like you kind of want an accent here or something like that, but like the accent is here, right? This is the staccato part, right? Right? So if you do something here, it has to be biting and it has to be kind of the same dynamic, right? So forte on everything makes sense. Or even mezzo forte accent or something like that, or staccato. So yeah, but it just doesn't quite work. Now the dynamics here on the cymbal part are very problematic. So you have piano diminuendo to mezzo forte, right? That doesn't make any sense. So if you wanted this to be piano and then have this, and in fact it all does that, right? Did you mean the opposite way around? Perhaps you meant the opposite, right? So I'm going to take it for granted that you wanted the opposite thing. Piano crescendo to mezzo forte. All right. Okay, so then you have this roll here on the cymbal. And yeah, so you kind of don't need this right in here. If you're just going to let go here, you don't need this, because if you stop, let's say that you were to roll to just a note that just lets go, right? Rather than continuing to roll all the way up to this rest. Just roll up to here and then just have this sort of tie to that and just decay, right? Without any more rolls. Then that would probably work better, because then you wouldn't have to deal with so many dynamic changes, and then you wouldn't have to mark mezzo forte on every single note, right? This is really, really overmarked in terms of dynamics, right? So anyway, but I mean, look, it's a cool score. I enjoyed it. There's, like I've talked about before, very low trills in double bass. They kind of have a very rugged feeling to them, right? And the same thing is true for contrabassoon, right? You're trilling down here on this low G flat, and it is just going to feel very, very rugged. The lower you get with trills, and especially with bass instruments, the more kind of scrubbing, you sort of like, and even this will feel sort of scrubbing too, right? Especially if you didn't have slurs on it, it would feel very scrubbing. Do you know what I mean? Just almost like somebody scrubbing a pan, sort of that kind of feeling to it, right? So it's good that you have slurs, but it's but it's just, I don't know if everybody needed to trill so low on everything, right? Probably if you just trilled on the top octave, or maybe like the top 2 octaves here, if you're going to keep it with that triple octave, and just left it out of the low line, then it would sound exactly what you wanted to begin with. And then this all works. The little oboe is coming in here to the piano, the violins, that all works fine. So yeah, so I mean, this I would say just overall, you're experimenting with orchestration, you're getting used to it, you're having some thoughts about it, but just in the final analysis, you would need to balance a lot of stuff. You would need to really think about whether or not the textures that you've orchestrated completely work, as like your last final idea. And it really I cannot recommend enough that you study the orchestration style of Rimsky-Korsakov and then Ravel when he orchestrated pictures at an exhibition, and so on and so forth, and pick up some tips from that, some ideas about proportion and color and everything else, okay? But other than that, really great score, great way to start this collection of website entries. Hey, Brendon. If you could see my face right now, you would see the biggest smile. That was just really delightful. If you're not getting regular jobs doing crossover orchestrations or doing film work or working for Disney or Miramax, or I don't know, Miramax might be out of business, but you're working for a company that does a lot of orchestrations for like comedy or family films or that kind of genre, then then there is no justice. You should be, I have no idea where you're at professionally, but that was just really some really fun, very professional minded orchestration, and along a very cinematic style. Okay, so having said that, having given you a big compliment like that, I'm still gonna say that, like, you got to tell me, how many of what, right? I mean, here you made an effort. Flutes 1 and 2, oboes 1 and 2, blah blah blah. You should have said horns so and so, trumpets, like, I guess obviously three there, and so on. How many trombones, and so on. All right, and then here, tenor trombone is kind of a strange thing to be assigning to the bass trombone part. You could have just said, like, trombone 3, right? Trombone 1 and 2, trombone 3. All right, but anyways, it's no big deal. So, yeah. Yeah, and you've got some of the elements, but what was very cool about this, and I hope that there are other people watching this besides just Brendon, um, is like the sense of adaptation rather than orchestration. Do you know what I mean? So Brendon just like rewrote this basically and made it fit his particular vision. It's if Mussorgsky were still alive today, it would almost not be actionable, right? In terms of somebody wanting a royalty or something like that, because it is so altered, right? Not that anybody is stealing from Mussorgsky here. We're paying homage to him, but yeah, yeah, but all of these touches, like, there's this lovely little pizzicato and these little arco staccato runs. The harp right in here. This should be marked. This should be marked forte, by the way. And I would put in a nuance here, like I put in like some hairpins here, like a hairpin going forward, crescendo. Yeah, but very cute. Do you know what I mean? It's just cute as hell. You know, if this were the girl next door, you would want to go out with her, right? I mean, it's that it's that kind of scoring. So really fun. Um, I don't know if I can just really add a lot in terms of saying do this, don't do that. I would say that there was absolutely zero reason for you to use alto flute, at least in this first page. There's nothing here that it wouldn't be better for a third flute player to play, right? So the alto flute is not just the bass to two other flutes. You have to get away from that kind of thinking. So if this were just let me turn off the transposing for a second. All right, so these are the actual pitches that are being played. So these pitches are perfectly fine. They're perfectly firm in the context of this dynamic. And what's more, to change things back, the alto flute isn't all that butch itself, right? This is not necessarily, it's not a situation where you say, well, this is a stronger register for flute, so it'll be stronger for alto flute transposed, and that way I can get around the third flute being too weak down there. But that's not the way it works. Alto flute is a different timbre, right? And I mean, it is weak across the same area. You should read my tip on like the range of alto flutes. It's somewhere in there. Just kind of talking about how the weak region of the flute is the same as the first octave. It's from C to G, right? That is the weakest part of the standard C flute. The octave from G to G, that first written C octave for the alto flute, is equally weak, right? So you do not like get any props for being stronger here. So I would just say, look, just score this as the third flute part, and then you save the orchestra the expense of having to rent one if they don't have one, or have a player that is less good on it. But yeah, I love the way that you reinterpret the melody here. I like the cor anglais kind of answering, and and the way that you've scored this, what's really great about this is that it doesn't really, like, these players didn't need any doubling, right? They stand out really beautifully as a solo. To look at the next page, we see that the process of adaptation is continuing, and once again, like these higher notes, they just sound better on a standard flute. You know, highest note being a concert A flat, right? So that's all a fine. It's a much better register. I would assign that rather than having alto flute. Now, if you had had some reason to have alto flute in this arrangement later on, that's great, but it should still be third flute here until you have a real reason to bring out the alto flute itself as a soloist or as a unique texture. But here it's just basically doing third flute parts. So just kind of no need for it to be included as an alto flute. But this is all very fun. It has a very spicy kind of bullfight sound to it, and I like just like the way that it is atypical, right? And this is all scored pretty well. Of the kind of climbing up through the registers, dropping off when things get too high, coming back in. That was all very nicely done, and this is also quite good. The trading off downwards in the registers till you get very, very low with these bassoons, and you managed to stay in D flat major, right, throughout this. And this was interesting too. You cut out the sense of alternating, and then just did this with some trills in it. This passage, and it was also quite highly spiced as well. Yeah, you're going to need to do some kind of balancing there with the harp and everything else. All right, one last little caution here. Unless you are going to score a downward arpeggio, you should never use the up arpeggio. The up arpeggio mark, that may be what's going to happen, but it is better just to use the standard arpeggio mark, right? Because what will happen is if you put the up arpeggio in there, then the harpist is going to start getting nervous and saying, where are the down arpeggios? There's an up arpeggio here. Where's the down arpeggio? Where's the down arpeggio? Oh, and then they'll say to themselves, "Oh yeah, right." They're just throwing that in there because they're a composer. Maybe they're at university or there's some other kind of thing like that. So I would say just make it a standard arpeggio line, right? Just right in here. Because there's no need to have the up without the down, right? This is intended to be used when there's an alternation of directions. Otherwise, it's completely superfluous, right? You don't want superfluous stuff in your scoring. So, other than that, just like rather than turning this into a great big lecture on this, I'm going to move on. But nicely done, Brendon, and some great scoring. And look, you should be getting gigs. All right, next score now. And next we have Jack's entry. And what's great about this is that, just like we just heard, very, very cinematic, very contemporary adaptation. Now, this is very true to the classical roots type not adaptation, orchestration. Very much a heartfelt, more authentic in intention type of transcription, right? So so it's just really great to see those two because this one is also just wonderfully proportioned. I mean, thought you did a really great job here, Jack. And I mean, it's I don't know if you need like A2 on this first note. It's probably better just to unless you really want this first note emphasized, and you also throw in trumpet here. Unless you want that really emphasized, then you probably just have that note just come in with the first and the second and the first and the second and so on, trading off or whatever, however you want to manage it. Okay, and then just doubling the pizzicato and then the second violin, and this worked out well, and yeah, I mean, so the general strategy here of the accompaniment is was great. And this is another example of a polished approach to a to simpler, more direct orchestration, right? So that has also got its own lessons, right? You can be the arrangement, as we just heard in that mock-up, can be just as effective, right? In its directness, right? So yeah, so it was great to to hear the two, one right after the other. So here um, the melodic approach is quite good. Violins in pizzicato, doubling trumpet and oboe, with the first flute above. And this, I've talked before about how flute can get buried by string tone when it is doubling, but that is bowed string tone. In this case, it'll actually be quite clear, especially as um, the trumpets overtones are feeding it, right? And the oboe as well. Now, one way of keeping this perfectly even right in here, right? Like normally I would mark this down to pianissimo here rather than piano. But you could keep this perfectly even if the trumpet were muted, and then you would get almost a perfect blend with the oboe, right? The oboe and the trumpet would play together absolutely seamlessly. Now here, you change a little bit about the context, right? Of course, we have a different harmonic context, but by taking out the oboes, right, and having clarinet be the sort of middle voice doubling with the trumpet, it changes everything, right? It's just because the oboe is so pungent and it adds so much to the tone, right? Um, yeah, and that would also work very well with muted trumpet, right? So it's a it's a cool just very direct approach here. I don't want to say simple because like people can people could like just knock this off in a minute, right? Or they could sweat buckets over it for weeks. You never know. What looks simple to you might actually be very complicated for the orchestrator. So I try not to take anything for granted. I mean, I assume that everybody is giving me their best effort. That is and if I'm wrong, then that's not on me, right? Anyhow, but yeah, I really like this first page, and then on to the second page where we've got like an all winds approach. So A2 flutes, A2 oboes, then with an added clarinet on that, and then the lower octave is second clarinet with A2 bassoon. So this is one intense blocky texture. Now, I feel that you're just not going to get very much punch here, right? And that actually came through in the mock-up, right? So I mean, it's okay, even though we've got a diminuendo here. It's okay to to put an accent or to mark up dynamically, just like for that one little punch, right? If you just really want it to snap, right? We're assuming like we're still pizzicato here and pizzicato there, right? So those could have been done, even as like snap pizzicato, which we saw in another entry, or accented pizzicato. So just like something to just really kind of flick off. I just feel like this is, the way that this little phrase ends is almost just sort of like flicking the fingers, right? So it's just it has a dynamic arc to it that has that little abrupt lift at the end, right? So we sort of lose that a little bit in this interpretation. The other thing to think about is that you're scoring high A natural here, right? And that, I mean, your last dynamic was, I think, was P or mezzo piano or something like that in the previous page. So that's not really realistic for this high A, right? So it's really going to be more of like a mezzo forte or even a forte, right? So that um, the problem with sound sets is that they do things that are impossible. Like, you get a high C from a trumpet that is pianissimo, right? And so it's just like those things are not. So if you know that you're going to be getting like a very bright, very snappy tone up here, then you might as well just score to that, right? Anyway, so that's my observation about that. But this is a very, it's a very intense sound. I mean, the flute is going to add a little bit of tone weight here, but it's really not going to contribute very much until you get to about right here. Then it's going to start to dominate a little bit. Right from right here, the flute and the clarinet are going to start to take over, and the oboe will be part of the sound, but it'll be much thinner, right? And then as you kind of go back down towards this area here, this range here, then it'll be more balanced, sort of, but as it like moves through the registers, one instrument will get weaker, the flute, and the other two will get more nasal, stronger, right? So it's really a trade-off when you do these massive, and there were a lot of of Atu everybody kind of lines in this particular section in the entries so far. Right, and then I like this. I like the way that you dropped voices, and then you brought this down. I thought that was very wise, right? And just like as a way of introducing more string tone as you went, until finally you were left with this, the horns, which is a good, it's something I did myself. It's a good way of bringing things back into the fold. So yeah, I mean, like I said before, a nice direct. Intriguing, but very very cool, very cool interpretation. And just a little curious, like the bassoon really getting pushed high here. I mean, I guess that's if that's where the line goes. It's really no big deal for the bassoonists to be playing this. It's just not there. It's not a very strong note for them, or not a very like the clarinet, like one clarinet will easily outplay them in this register. Um, I should have put something in the guidelines for this that you did not have to do. You did not have to score the exact dynamics. Um, of the piano version, right? This could have been forte in a lot of scores with the way that people, forte to fortissimo, right? Rather than mezzo forte, which is, just pulling your punches. It's just not quite as fun, right? But I like the way that this all ties together right in here. That's nice. And it sort of drops out here. Sforzando piano. This should have had sforzando on every one of these ending notes as well, right? So that they all join in the push, right? And then they all drop out as the alternating line continues, right? And this was also very cool too, the way that this voice dropped out right here. It just to leave the seconds continuing on. So yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I would have gone diminuendo to piano and then pianissimo here, right? And just had the horns underplaying by one dynamic level, right? So pianissimo here to like sort of a mezzo forte accent rather than sforzando, which people will immediately think is a forte with a sort of a fortissimo bite, right? Anyhow, but other than that, pretty cool. I really liked this a lot, Jack. And now on to our next entry. So once again, I'm faced with a full length orchestration, it just like breaks my heart to break this down into 13 bars. I mean, I feel almost like it's, on the one hand, I feel like it's sort of tragic because there's so much to share in this score, so many cool things. On the other hand, Lorenzo, since you didn't quite, you didn't agree with me to show everything, just like maybe it's better for you, to possibly, if you're going to have this published or performed, maybe it's better that we don't share everything. Do you know what I'm saying? So anyway, I mean, just like, if people are going to put all that work into it, I almost like really prefer that they would enter, in like support on Patreon just for a month to, so that I can do the full evaluation of their score, because it's just, I mean, all that work, and then all I do is just comment on the first 13 bars. So anyway, so apologies for that. But now let's get down to analyzing this really lovely, like, introduction. It's a sort of an introduction to the rest of the cool stuff that you do in your orchestration. And I mean, there's so many fun things in this. A few things possible to comment on as we go along. It might be better to have like the second player play up to here, and then have the first take over, or actually, second player play up to here, and then have the first player take over here, right? Just to kind of save the first's chops a little bit, so that like they're just like it's more obviously a solo part. And then then we got the first clarinet player here. That's all good, and the bass clarinet kind of chiming in here. So that's all doable. Right, if it were a little bit longer, like if the bass clarinet had started way back here, then I would say it's just a little bit too long, in terms of breath. You have to kind of give them a place to breathe. And this is all good. Now, just like if you were aware, you could have, like that. You probably are totally aware of this, but this could have been A sharp and B flat stuck together, right? So that. So that you had a more resonant, like you could just have a single resonant tone on B flat, like the enharmonically B flat from both strings. And you could have even had A sharp and B flat and G sharp taking the place of the A flat, right? And then still gotten both tones. So just, some possibility to think about. However, the other thing you need to think about is that I think I have to check with the harpist, but I think it's kind of difficult to play two harmonic pitches like right next to each other. Like this seems to suggest that the right hand is playing the B flat and the left hand is playing the A flat. Multiple harmonic pitches are always best in the left hand rather than the right hand, just because of the positioning of the hands. Right, it's hard to get the palm, which stops the node, the harmonic node, or doesn't stop. I mean, it holds it, like it sort of touches the harmonic node, whereas the finger plucks above it. Right, so it's the left hand that can do the multiples. So I would just rescore this with like treble clef, and then and these guys just as a single, like one stem, just to make sure that it's obvious to the player. And it's certainly no problem for the left hand to play up here, to play these. Now I'm assuming like the problem with Note Performer and Sibelius in general is that it interprets harmonic indications at pitch, right? Now, if your intention was that this should be the sounding pitch, the harpist would really prefer that you scored an octave lower, and in which case it would be down here, and that would be very much in the range of the left hand as it was. So anyhow, so just something to think about. All right, and then continuing on. I mean, this is all like, now notice everybody how Lorenzo has broken up the bowing pattern. So like down, up, down, up, down, up. Okay. And I don't know. I mean, you may be a string player, Lorenzo, so I'm not going to challenge you on that too much. But just it's probably simpler. It's probably simpler and smoother just to make these a single slur. You know, even if there's a little bit of an awkward dip with the bow, it's probably just like it'll probably blend in better with everything else that's going on, rather than creating a like an up bow stroke on every third beat there. But yeah, but everything else works really really well. I like the little touch of triangle. It's just really really fun. Now to turn the page, we go on here and okay, so this is really fun. I mean, it creates a certain kind of almost shaking sound, or like almost like puts a lot. Just puts a lot of emphasis on each eighth beat when when you do like staccato on when you do this kind of thing. But it also kind of gives it a slightly shaking feel, like like somebody is grabbing you by your shirt and kind of shaking back and forth, right? So it just is, it has that kind of feeling to it. And I mean, I hope that's intentional because it's a very very cool effect. And I like the way that you downscale the dynamic here on the trumpet. That's exactly what to do. You probably could have done the same thing for the horn. Do you know what I mean? Because the winds and the strings are going to work together quite well. But the horn is going to have a tendency to play out a little bit, right? But the players are going to be sitting next to each other, and they'll just adjust their dynamics, but still. So yeah, so here we have a very simple combination: A2 clarinets, A2 bassoons, along with the viola and cello playing octaves. And it's kind of nice because it's middle strings, right? So it does not have that same very bright sound. It's going to be a more muted sound, and that kind of works together really well with the clarinet. So clarinet and viola working together really really well. And nice surge with the trill, and keeping the trill in a higher place, right, rather than trilling really 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 low. And then yeah, and of course like the strings coming in here. Very neat that the seconds are doubling the cellos rather than the violas. That's very cool. Because you've got enough weight on that middle voice already, right? With the the clarinet right in here and the trumpet and so on. So yeah, and then we just have a little bit of A2 flute on top. Now this was the coolest part right here for me, was adding a little bit of xylophone. Right now here, this should, yeah, you marked it forte, but it should be forte accent or marcato or some other kind of thing. Just really bring that out. That should be like this should have some punch to it, right? Okay, and then this happens twice. It's pretty much like a carbon copy, is a duplication of the previous bar. Okay, and then this was the funnest part. Having the xylophone play an octave above everybody else, right? Just to like come in and have be the top voice, and it just immediately gets attention. Where here it's like very well mixed. Here it immediately draws the attention to it, right? That is its quality when you want it. I would say here it probably draws a little too much attention. What you are hearing in the mock-up is exactly what you're going to hear in an actual orchestra situation, right? So probably the conductor would just look at the xylophone player and just like kind of push their hand down just to try to get the xylophone player to play softer anyway. That's what I would probably do if I were conducting this. So if I were a conductor, isn't that a song from a famous musical, Broadway musical? Anyways, but I would say just go one step ahead and mark this as pianissimo, and then you get a better blend overall, right? And then this is fine. I like the horns coming out in here. So I mean, it all makes sense, but the tragedy, of course, is that it all makes even more sense with the rest of the arrangement, which I can't show you because of the way that this orchestration challenge works, right? So yeah, I just feel a bit sad about that. But all the same, Lorenzo. I mean, what a great score, and I just really appreciated like the full version was just really amazing, and yeah, just like try to get it performed is what I would say. Maybe you could tweak a few things, like things like putting the dynamic in the middle in a harp part, and there's a few little bits and pieces that you could fix. But yeah, wouldn't it be funny if all over the world suddenly there were dozens of orchestras being approached with arrangements of the seamstress, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Like all of a sudden, orchestration challenge scores are being played all over the place. That is my dream. And with that, on to the next entry for this very, very cool group of website evaluations. Okay, so here is a score where I feel that changing to D major would have been the right decision, right? Just because it is so string centric. You know what I mean? It just now there are a lot of fingerings here that would just be so simple. If the players here were playing like with an open A string, it just becomes like the easiest thing in the world to play, as opposed to D flat where they have to sort of like kind of form a chord over the. Well, it's hard to explain, but yeah, but I'm sort of thinking actually I have my fingers stretched out in a in how I would play this on mandolin. So yeah, it's just so much easier, like for some of these patterns to be in D major with the open A and so on, and other advantages we could find. But yeah, but I won't take issue with that too much. But it's an interesting score. I mean, it's just really intriguing in in the way that we just really have it simplified here, right? It's like just like horns to throw in these chords here at the end, flutes to sort of bulk up the first violins, sort of to double with them, add a little bit of tone color. It really is mainly just a piece for upper strings, just with the way that it's scored. If we look at the string scoring as it goes on, we have some dropouts, right? Like we have places where the second violins divisi start to do things like one group drops out so that this group can double with the first, right? And like right here, I would say, like, if there's a way of getting into your notation app and marking violins 1A, violins 1B, violins 2A, 2B, and so on and so forth. It really helps the conductor keep track of what's there on the page. I'm not so sure if you needed to do all of this divisi stuff. Do you know what I mean? I mean, just looking at it, I think you could have gotten away with just 3 groups of instruments and no divisi, right? Okay, and just listen to my crazy plot here, my plan, right? So, okay, so this could be divisi here, right? Or actually, okay, wait, I'm getting behind my own idea. All right, so suppose that this top line here was first violins. Then this line here was second violins, right? And then this right here was moved down a little bit. It's actually kind of cool the way that it crosses, though. Yeah. Okay, so I will grant you the first violin's divisi, the second violin's divisi, and then you've got this sort of interacting pattern here with the violas. What if this were viola and that were cello? Do you know what I mean? Since they're just kind of like cumulatively, when they're playing somewhat higher, somewhat more in the mid-range, it's harder for them to compete with the strings when they're in their sweet spot, right? With the violins when they're in their sweet spot. Okay. And then, kind of moving on here, I think that this all could have been done without any divisi at all. Just like first violins here, second violins taking that line, violas taking that line, right? And just all the way through. But I mean, I appreciate that you're trying to, like, you came up with these sort of interacting patterns here, and like the ultimate result of what we see here in this pattern is going to be that you hear a single F, then basically the rest of this pattern is going to be just D flat and A flat repeated over and over again, right? I mean, it's actually kind of cool since the pattern sort of rotates between those two pitches. You get a sort of a Tchaikovsky effect, or some other Wagner also experimented with this with his harp writing. It's just that, like, you get a kind of a glittering effect, and that's I'm not gonna put that down at all. Yeah, so I mean, it all kind of works. It adds together into just a wonderfully hypnotic approach, right? So so I think this is all good. The first system is good. I keep saying pages. This is, since this is all one page or one screen. So the first system is fine if you are happy with, like, the sense that this will feel like it's repeating but not, right? And then, but then here you don't need to go divisi. I think that it's just sort of fine with single voices, single groups. Okay. There's much more to say, but just a couple other things to talk about here. One is, I feel, I mean, it's kind of cool. You're experimenting with string scoring here. That's all good. There's nothing inherently unplayable here. It's just be aware that this is a very kind of brute force approach, right? Just like it's just very kind of just blocks of strings playing patterns. And they can go forever. It just does not bother them. Just so long as their arm doesn't tire out, they are fine. And there's nothing in here that would do that. So, but yeah, it's kind of a cool way of getting a lot of the mechanical energy. That sort of sewing machine that I talked about in my first lecture when I just talked about my orchestration. So, here we've got flutes. We got flute 1 and flute 2 trading off on this. And I see the way that you're, like, providing plenty of breathing time for the flutes. That's cool. I mean, that will all work fine. I think it could still have been all scored on one staff, but it's still fine. I mean, it just kind of works. If there's a lot of fiddly, like, rests here and not there and so on and so forth, then it's all fine. It's just, yeah, it's good the way that you did it. It's okay. And it's just really kind of nothing much to take issue with. It's, the flutes are just basically serving to fatten up the first line. That's just going to give a lot of weight to the very top, right? And then the rest of it is all sort of churning away below. It just kind of makes me think that, like, there could have been, what if you had a clarinet or two clarinets kind of doubling the violins below, or the first violin divisi lower staff below. What if this line right here, this second line, was doubled by oboes in the same way that you're doing that? So you just kind of get that nice colorful texture. What if you had brought in a cello? What if there were some kind of pacing in there? There's so much possibilities. I mean, I feel like this is a sketch. Do you know what I mean, Robert? It's like, it's not, it was like you're experimenting with this. It's like, I think that this must be Notion or some other app like that, where just kind of, or maybe MuseScore or something like that, where it's just like it's a very basic kind of online app and it has like like I recognize this. I'm starting to recognize this sound set. Like when things go back and forth, they start to feel very mechanical, almost like it is one sound that just has a sort of a strange frequency modulation in it, right? That's kind of what it feels like. So, I mean, I think you are ready to step up to a more sophisticated scoring system. Like I think Sibelius First is now free. Do you know what I mean? Like Sibelius First with like, so that's free, and then like maybe Note Performer, which is I think it's like maybe $130 or something. I don't know what the latest price is on it. Maybe it's up a little bit from that, but just that would give you a better idea of like the sounds that are that you're using. And not that I am not my job in life is to promote notation apps or sound sets or anything like that, but I just feel that like it's just becoming a reality, even for us concert orchestrators. Like I'm mainly a concert orchestrator and I do a lot of crossover too. And I do the occasional film score. But it's, but like, even in those situations, I will have times when, I'm working with vocalists and they need to sing along to something, or I'm working with a band that is going to play along with the orchestra, or I'm working with tech people who need to like work, they need to practice their lighting cues, or I need to convince a manager or a conductor or somebody else who doesn't audiate. Like almost all the conductors I work with audiate. They just like see the score and they read it. But occasionally, you're working with an assistant conductor or a conducting student or somebody like that. They just want to hear what the piece sounds like. They want that gratification too, right? So anyways, yeah, so just like I would just say you are ready to step up, to do more complex scores and more complex sketches, and this is just such a cool idea. I just feel like you need to fill it out, you know what I mean? Like add double bass, add cello, add bassoons, add some percussion in there if you felt like it. I mean, really, it's a very cool sketch. I liked it a lot, and I know I was a little picky in there, but nice ideas. And look, hey, what are you going to be like as an orchestrator in a year? Where is your head going to be at? I would really like to find out, because the next piece that I announce next year is going to be really amazing. So, and a piece that like most people would not imagine that I would put up. So it would be great to have you take a crack at that too. All right. So thank you for sharing this with us, and on to the next entry. All right. So this is another entry that goes on longer than the prescribed 13 bars. It doesn't do the full length, so I don't feel quite as horrible at not evaluating the whole thing, but it does go to some really interesting places by the third screen, which, I mean, I really wish that I could evaluate for you, Sebastian. But I mean, but some very cool stuff in here. Now, once again, um, we've got a sound set that doesn't have a lot of depth to it. So it's um, that is something where I'm looking at this and just playing it in my head right now. With my own internal orchestra, and it is so much richer than what we just heard in that mock-up. So yeah. Anyway, but still, really fun piece. Some of these approaches reminiscent of other things that we've seen. Flutes leading off, then then kind of keeping it wind focused in terms of the patterns, which are accentuated by pizzicato and so on. This is a new thing to have timpani punctuate the downbeat of each bar, and yeah, I felt that the strongest part of this entire arrangement was the way that you adapted you adapted this piece so that there was more of a sense of motion in the bass. Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's one of the problems with music that is trending towards kind of an impressionistic kind of a feeling, and that is that the bass doesn't move around very much. And for some, some people who have been raised on more contrapuntal music, more polyphonic music, it's just not enough. Do you know what I mean? And I see how you are supplying some, sort of making up for some of those defects here by supplying some bass function that isn't in the original arrangement. And I think that that is fantastic. That's a great idea. I think that you could have added more support here with the bassoons from the very beginning, right? To kind of like, you could have started off here with staccato, maybe just a little bit of short tenuto following that line right there. See, this right here you got to watch out for. You have a double bass note that is shorter than the bassoon note. So the bassoons are going to just really kind of start to take over right in here. Do you know what I mean? And then here we've got different articulation marks on the bass instruments, and that does not always give you the best result, right? It would be better if these were both staccato, right? So everybody worked together and you had a really nice blend. Unfortunately, one of the problems with bass is that if you have too many like discrete textures, it starts to get very distracting. That's something you can get away with more treble, more mid-range instruments. Like you can have instruments that are playing unisons or playing, textures inside of each other, right? But and that don't blend, right? That contrast. But if you have too many contrasting articulations and timbres in the bass, it just really starts to get distracting. It starts to pull attention away from the main thrust of the music. Okay, so that's my scolding. And you've got a couple of timpani strokes here. That's okay. You just want to bring out that F. That's fine. That doesn't really need any kind of massaging. It'd be nice if it was kind of the same. If it was, you could make this into like a quarter note. But really, the hall is what's going to carry the resonance of the timpani and bass drum if you use bass drum. This was kind of nice. It made me kind of wonder whether or not you could have used a contrasting mallet instrument or some other instrument to sort of help out the piccolo and the flutes here, right? Because you've got these two things being played an octave apart, but you've got this glockenspiel both times, right? And you already are adding glockenspiel over the flutes in their lower register here, right? Along with the pizzicato and so on and so forth. So it's like one approach here, and then you go to a completely different approach and texture, which I think is really great. You have a nice contrast here as strings, with your first violins and violas separating out the pattern, basically just like really transcribing what's going on in the piano. Okay. But we still are kind of stuck on glockenspiel. I mean, here's a place where you could have thrown in harp octaves, kind of playing quite high, and you could have gotten a complementary sound to what happened before, but without having to just do glockenspiel again, right? But I mean, on the other hand, though, like the harp and the triangle working together here is a really cool effect. But then you don't really need the triangle over here. Do you know what I mean? It's just kind of reusing elements when you're contrasting doesn't always have the best effect. This is neat though, this little bit of bassoon in here. Like once again, trying to increase the amount of bass function without being too distracting. And I think that is very admirable. Okay. Now on this next page, we're actually, let me go back a little. Sorry about that. So now we're getting into the like the sort of scrubbing part, which I like to refer to. It's very mechanistic right in here, just like really kind of capturing the sound of the sewing machine. I feel just really somebody furiously sewing along, and once again I feel that it's like I approve of changing around the dynamics so that it doesn't exactly do what Mussorgsky does. It's just really no need to do exactly, what he scored for piano. This is a little confusing though. See, I think that the bass should follow. Like if you're going to have like a big bassoon note here and timpani strokes here, then your bass should have the same dynamic arc as the rest of the orchestra. You should make this the loud note, right? Not this E flat here. You should go mezzo forte to forte hairpin. Okay, and then notice like some other scores where mezzo forte was repeated over and over again. Look, see, there was no need to do that, right? There wasn't even a need to put it forte in here, right? We understand that's forte. You can put it in the other instruments that just start. But the players will understand that that is forte in the middle. You don't need to mark that in or write that in. Okay, this was really cool to have the trumpets play this. Now, this I'm not so sure about. Like this A3 note on the F here, sort of mezzo forte-ish. I just don't even know if you needed to even have that note in there at all. Do you know what I mean? Maybe A2, but I mean, I don't know if you need all three players on these two notes. So you probably didn't even need three B-flat trumpets, but later on you do use them in different ways, I suppose. So if I'm remembering correctly, so yeah, nice use of bass clarinet here, which is essentially doubling the cellos, and then we've got the B-flat clarinets, and they're being doubled by everybody else in the strings, along with some other parts. And then we've got the flutes and the piccolo coming in higher and higher. That's kind of a cool effect. Yeah, and then it's nice stacking things up and then pulling the rug out from under. Right? To just have the strings come in there, right? With the trill. Okay, now let's look at this page. And then you come right back in strong with your with the rest of the orchestra, once again keeping the bass function more interesting, right? Yeah, with the timpani with that note up there. Okay, I guess that all works. And then you've got a little bit of harp and clarinets plus horns. Yeah, I mean, that all works fine. So it's a fun score. I mean, I just really enjoyed looking at this. And actually, since the sound set was so creaky, I was really using my internal orchestra to look this over. After I think I listened to it just to hear what you were hearing, and then I just thought, okay, well, just my internal sound set is so much better, so I'll just read it that way. And you got some very cool ideas in here. I mean, I think it would be like if you've got like a local orchestra, a regional orchestra, a city orchestra, something like that, and you have a chance at having them do a reading or programming one of your works or something like that. Just orchestrate the rest of this out, clean up the score quite a bit, and see if they'll play it. Okay, because there's some fun stuff in here. I mean, I love these trumpets right in here, and this whole texture right in here is really fun. I mean, there's some really nice stuff in here, and it would be a shame if you didn't do more with it. So yeah, so with that, I'll just say, very cool score. Thank you for submitting this to the 2019 Orchestration Challenge. Thanks everybody for their great submissions to this challenge. I just the real challenge is for me, right? But it's just such a joy to look at everybody's works and to just constantly be shown that that my ideas about what the perfect orchestration can be for this piece are just one idea, and there are so many different ways to orchestrate this same piece of music. And I think that Mussorgsky would have been really proud to see, even just this group right here of orchestrations. I think he would have been really happy, and not to even mention the 20 other, or how many other orchestrations I've already evaluated, and then maybe the 40 more to come, right? Quite a few to get through, and boy, I really am enjoying myself. So thank you so much for making my life interesting, and for honoring Mussorgsky's great effort. And I wish I knew more of the history behind this piece, because I'm sure it's really interesting. But I don't know. I'll have to look it up if I can find a good book on Mussorgsky that I haven't read already. So thanks one and all, and stay posted for the G group of evaluations. We're almost getting to the end of the website evaluations, just G and H. And the Patreon evaluations are going to start coming faster and thicker, just in case you were a Patreon supporter who submitted and you're wondering where your evaluation is. It's coming right up. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you again soon.